Welcome to this next Google Apps script video. In this video we're going to cover how we can fetch external data via the Google Apps script. So normally if you're using Google Spreadsheets, you have imported your own data or literally typed the data inside the spreadsheet itself. But we can use the app script to import data from third-party tools, so external sources. And the way we do that is by making an API call to those databases. So this can be literally any tool that has an API available. So think of any social media platform. You can, for instance, import your Twitter and Facebook data. You can also link to any kind of libraries that have APIs available. And in this video, I would like to show you how to do this. So to start off, we open our script editor. I'm going to create a new file named import. So the name of the file isn't important, and then it automatically writes a function for myself. So the function is my function and it's empty. So what we have to do is make a fetch request. So if we type in fetch URL, it will automatically give us an example, URL fetch app. And the only thing this URL fetch app needs as an input is a URL. So we're going to type URL. And if you're not familiar with these formulas, I've also put them in my Google Apps script cheat sheet. So if I scroll all the way down, I can find them right here. So URL fetch app.fetch. So this is the function we actually want. So URL fetch app.fetch, that's the one I forgot. So if you want to just copy paste the entire script in one go, in this particular video we're retrieving data from a third party. We can also send data to a third party application. So for instance, we can send data to Slack to notify us if our data input was updated, or for like daily reports. But we can also send data to social media platforms to post on there. But in this case we're going to use this script. So function my function takes a URL and returns the URL fetch app.fetch. So we're going to fetch from a URL. So let me define a variable named URL. And we just need to get that URL. So in this video I would like to use an example that works with a database of scientific articles. And they've provided an example query that doesn't need any APIs, doesn't need any complications. So if you're interested in the more complicated versions of this script, mainly to do with API request, needing API keys or authorization, happy to give you some examples of how we can do that. So this is a very basic example. We take the URL and then we make a fetch request to this URL. So this to show you how this output would look like. If we log this in our console, we can actually see what we'll get. So let's run this. So you see it gets a lot of data, and this data is filtered from their database by the title of DNA. So the title of the journal should be displayed somewhere in here. Here we go. So it's function title display and indeed contains DNA. So what I would like to do is to filter this data out and just get a list of all the different titles. So to do that, we first have to convert this data into JSON data. So if we go into our cheat sheet, we have this JSON.parse. So I'd like to use that to add to the fetch. So we're going to define this as a variable. So the variable will be fetch request equals URL fetch app.fetch URL, and then we want to make a response equal to the JSON.parse fetch request. Perfect. And then we want to just check what this actually gives us. Response. Let's run this and see what we'll get. Okay, so now we get a JSON output of the response. So this is quite a big response and kind of hard to read. So what I'd like to do with this, I'll just usually copy paste a part of this over. So let's say copy paste this. And then I go into a JSON formatter. So in this case, I used jsonformatted.curiousconcept.com. And in here, I can just paste this data and then hit process to kind of see the structure. So the structure of our data starts with a response, then it goes into docs, and within docs it has the different titles. So there's an author display and title display. Okay, perfect. So we're just looping through these different documents. Okay, so it's response.docs and then .title display. So let's just write that down. The response that we want is response.docs.title display. So we want to narrow this down, and let's just first get one of them. So let's define a variable title equals response dot again response. So this is the variable response, so we can actually rephrase this to result. And then this is the response within the JSON array. So we'll go into response to docs, and from docs we only want to take the first one. So the first one is actually 0, and then title display. And let's see if that actually worked. Let's put it in our console by logger.log title. Run this. And this indeed gives us the title. So this should be the first title. So what I would then like to do is take a list of all these titles and insert them in our sheet. And we're going to insert them into the sandbox tab. So the way to do that would be first to make an array of all the titles. So let's make an array of the titles named var titles equals an empty array, and then we're going to loop through all the results. So to write a loop, we're going to create a variable named I. So for I equals 0, we're going to loop through the length of the document. So that would be I being less than the length of this document. And until then, we're going to add 1. And then we want to push to the titles variable. So titles dot push. And then we want to add the array of title. And then instead of 0, this should be I. So what this does is it starts with I is equals 0. So we first go to 0, take that title and add that title to the titles array. Then we go to 1 more. So then we do 1. So we take the second title and add that to the titles array as well. So to see if this actually works, let's output this to the logger and see what we get. Okay, so this should be titles, not array. Okay, so now we have one array with all the titles in there. So that's great. What we then want to do is to push this into our sheet. And I just want to have them in here, column 1. So the way to do that would be to first define the spreadsheet. So variable spreadsheet equals spreadsheet app dot get active sheet, and then var sheet equals dot get sheet by name, I think it's get sheet by name. name equals sandbox. And then we want to get the range and push it into a range. So to do that, we go into, say, get range from this sheet. So sheet dot get range, and the range takes a row. So we start with row 1, then a column. We start with column 1, then the number of rows. So the number of rows is equal to the length of the titles array. And then the number of columns equals 1. And in that range, we want to set the values of titles. Okay, so let's see if that worked. So save this. So now it's empty, and I'm going to run it, and then we should see these being inserted here. So nothing is happening. So it's because ss.getSheetName is not a function. Okay. So let's see if getSheetName is the right one. The parameters string don't match the method's signature. Okay, so these functions are wrong. So let's have a look in our cheat sheet what it should be. So it's get active spreadsheet, get sheet by name, and then get value. So get active spreadsheet and then get sheet by name. Okay, so I was referring to the active sheet and not the active spreadsheet. So let's run this again. They're still empty. Type cannot read property get range. Okay, what should that be? So that should be get range 1, 2, 3, 4. Should be fine. Sandbox, so that's typed wrong. So a little spelling mistake there. So now the execution started and completed, and we can indeed see the different titles in there. So that's how you can fetch data from an external source and then loop through that data and add it into your sheet. You can do all kinds of functions with it, and there's all kinds of other data that I could have gotten here. But this kind of shows you how to fetch from a URL, make a fetch request, parse this result into a JSON array, and then play around with that array to get the data into your sheet. So this is how to fetch data, so make a GET request. In the next video, we're going to do the opposite, in which we're going to make a POST request, which means that we're going to send data from our spreadsheet into a Slack app to send a message. So if that's of interest to you, let's have a look into that video and hope to see you there. If you have any questions, just leave a comment, leave a question, and I'll get back to you.